The Nakh, Sumerians, and Haplogroup J. But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. What I find fascinating about the Nakh peoples, like the Chechens and the English, is that they have an oral tradition that they come from the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia to the Caucasus. However, this oral account may be true and provable through the works of anthropology. The Chechens are one of the Nakh peoples who have lived in the highlands of the North Caucasus region since prehistory. There is archaeological evidence of historical continuity dating back to 3000 BC, as well as evidence pointing to their ancestors' migration from the Fertile Crescent 10,000 through 8000 BC. And so basically, through archaeology, they're able to see that, perhaps in fact, these Nakh people's ancestors came from the Fertile Crescent going to the Caucasus. And it says the Proto Northeast Caucasian language had many terms for agriculture, and Joanna Nichols has suggested that its speakers may have been involved in the development of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent and only later moved north to the Caucasus. According to Bernice Withrich's article, Peering into the Past with Words, Joanna Nichols showed that linguistic evidence indicates the ancestors of Nakh people migrated to the slopes of the Caucasus from the Fertile Crescent, where farming and raising sheep and cattle had been discovered. Nichols stated, the Nakh Dagestani languages are the closest thing we have to a direct continuation of the cultural and linguistic continuity or community that gave rise to Western civilization. Anthropologist Henry Harpington of the University of Utah is impressed by her research. Joan Nichols holds that the Derzuks were descended from extremely ancient migrations from the Fertile Crescent to the Caucasus, perhaps due to population or political pressures back in the Fertile Crescent. Others who believe the so-called Hurru-Uratrian version, such as George Anach Badez and Amje Jonica, still holds that those original migrants contributed to both the genetic and cultural traits of the modern English and Chechens, but that the primary ancestors were Nakh-speaking migrants from what became Northeast Urartu. So again, the English have 89% of J2 Y-DNA, which is the highest known frequency in the world, and J2 is closely associated with the Fertile Crescent. So what's fascinating about there may being a connection between the Nakh people and the Fertile Crescent is that we could connect this with the Sumerians. We know that the Nakh people spoke a non-Semitic and non-Indo-European language. They spoke a Caucasian language, specifically a Northeast Caucasian Hurru-Uratrian language. And this is from the Oxford Handbook of Ancient Anatolia, and it says, the Hurru-Uratrian, as a whole shared a yet earlier common ancestor with some of the numerous, comparatively obscure languages of the Caucasus is not improbable. And modern Caucasian languages are conventionally divided into southern, northwestern, and northeastern families. Georgian, for example, belongs to the southern family. Dankoff and Starstrom, in the most thorough attempt at finding a linkage yet published, have argued that Hurrian is a branch of the Eastern Caucasian family. This would make it a distinct relative of such modern languages as Chechenian, Avar, Lak, and Uyghur. And this is a English translation from Russian, dealing with the Chechenians and the English in Hurrian. And so it says, of the peoples existing in our time, the Chechenians and English are the closest to the Hurru or the Hurrian Uratrian in terms of language. And I have underlined in blue the source and the ISBN number. And here's another source in German, though, translated from German, and the ISBN number is underlined in blue. And so it says, the long-standing assumptions about the connections of Hurrian and Uratrian with the Caucasian languages have received serious confirmation thanks to the connected correspondences indicated in the Northeast Caucasian languages, and especially the Vanak. And of course, the Vanak are the Chechenian and English and Nakh peoples. That's just another way of saying it. So the Sumerians also spoke a non-Semitic and non-Indo-European language. I feel like a lot of people don't know this, but this should be stressed. The Sumerians were not a Semitic people. They did not speak a Semitic language. They were not an Indo-European people. They did not speak an Indo-European language. These population of people were non-Semitic and non-Indo-European. As a matter of fact, many linguists believe that these Sumerians may have spoken a Caucasian language, specifically related to Northeast Caucasian language like Hurrian, which is very interesting. Most historians have suggested that Sumer was first partially settled between 5,500 and 4,000 BC by a West Asian people who spoke the Sumerian language, a non-Semitic and non-Indo-European agglutinative language isolate, in contrast to its Semitic neighbors. So this is from Ancient History Encyclopedia, titled The Hurrians, and it says, Encyclopedia of Ancient History. Typologically, Hurrian is an agglutinating language with ergative grammar, unlike Indo-European and Semitic languages, but like the Sumerian language. Very interesting. This is from Archaeology Archive, who were the Hurrians, and it says, but Piotr Mikulski, an Assyrianologist at the University of Michigan, notes that Hurrian, like Sumerian, is a language unrelated to Semitic or Indo-European tongues that dominated the region during and after the 3rd millennium BC. And this is from lexical matches between Sumerian and Hurrian possible historical scenarios. And so it says, the paper deals with lexical matches between two ancient Near Eastern languages, Sumerian and Hurrian or Hurrian, namely several basic terms like hand, rain, etc. Lexical borrows from Sumerian into Hurrian, or vice versa. Genetic relation between Sumerian and Hurrian for prehistoric language shift adoption by a Hurrian or closely related group of the Sumerian language, or vice versa. Sumerian is a language spoken in southern Mesopotamia, modern Iraq. Its earliest cuneiform attestation dates from the late 4th or early 3rd millennium BC. It functioned as a living language until the late 3rd or early 2nd millennium BC. The Hurrian linguistic family consists of two closely related languages, Hurrian with several dialects and Urartian. Historically, Hurrian was spoken in the southeast of present-day Turkey, in northern Syria, and northern Iraq, at least from the second half of the 3rd millennium to the end of the 2nd millennium BC. Urartian is attested in the 1st millennium BC as a language of the Urartian Empire, present-day Armenia and neighboring areas. For the pre-literate period, it is natural to associate the Urartian people with the Caucasus culture, early Trans-Caucasian. And so this is another source. Sumerians had connections with the Caucasus, and it says the Hurrian Urartian language family consists of two closely related languages, Hurrian with several dialects and Urartian. Judging by historical evidence, the Hurrian language was spoken in the southeastern of modern Turkey, in northern Syria and northern Iraq, at least from the second half of the 3rd millennium to the end of the 2nd millennium BC. Hurrian and Urartian, like Sumerian, are languages of an agglutinative and ergative structure, which typologically brings them closer to Sumerian and opposes the Indo-European and Semitic languages of the ancient Near East. The greatest Orientalist of the 20th century, Igor Denkov, and the greatest comparative linguist, Sergei Starstrom, connected the Hurrian Urartian languages with the North Caucasian Nakh languages. Hurrian is correlated with the Caucasus archaeological culture presented at the beginning of the 4th through 3rd millennium BC in the South Caucasus and adjacent regions of the Middle East. Some of the Sumerians withdrew and migrated to the Caucasus, where they adopted the Para-Hurrian language, and then those whom we know as Hurrians and Urartians are ethnic Sumerians who switched to Hurrian and Urartian, but retained in the language a few basic words of their original language. So we do see a possible link with the Nakh language and the Sumerians, but what could solidify the connection between the Nakh people and the Sumerians? And the only way to do that is to use haplogroups. And here's a perfect study dealing with the Sumerians. It's called In Search of the Genetic Footprints of Sumerians, a survey of Y chromosome and mtDNA variation in the Marsh Arabs of Iraq. So it says, the Marsh Arabs are considered the population with the strongest link to the ancient Sumerians. And this is what makes them very important when it comes to studying about ancient Sumerians. Popular tradition, however, considers the Marsh Arabs as a foreign group of unknown origin. And this paper will deal with whether the Marsh Arabs are foreign or ancient, or descendants of ancient Sumerians. So, evidence of genetic stratification ascribable to the Sumerian development was provided by the Y chromosome data, where the J1-page 08 branch reveals a local expansion. Also, contemporary with the Sumerian city-state period that characterized southern Mesopotamia. On the other hand, a more ancient background shared with northern Mesopotamia is revealed by the less represented Y chromosome lineage J1-M267 star. Furthermore, a prevalent Middle Eastern ancestry of the modern population of the marshes of southern Iraq implies that if the Marsh Arabs are descendants of the ancient Sumerians, also the Sumerians were most likely autochthonous, meaning indigenous, and not of Indian or South Asian ancestry. Because some people believe that Sumerians were like Dravidians, but that's not the case according to the studies. So it says only two groups of populations arrived later, and in larger number leaved historical records. Sumerian and Semitic groups, and as you can see, it distinguished Sumerian and Semitic as two different groups. Anyways, the Sumerians, who spoke an isolated language not correlated with any linguistic family, are the most ancient group living in the region for which we have historical evidence. They occupied the delta between the two rivers in the southern part of the present Iraq, one of the oldest inhabited wetland environments. The Semitic group were semi-nomadic people who spoke a Semitic language and lived in the northern area of the Syro-Arabian desert, breeding small animals. From here they reached Mesopotamia, where they settled among the pre-existing populations. The Semitic people more numerous in the north, and the Sumerians more represented in the south. After having absorbed the pre-existing populations, melted their cultures, laying a basis of the Western civilization. So basically this whole section right here just basically broke down the difference between the Sumerians and the Semitic peoples, that these are in fact two different peoples, two different cultures, the way they lived, the areas that they lived, and so on. So it says, the ancient inhabitants of the marsh areas were Sumerians, who were the first to develop an urban civilization some 5,000 years ago. The second hypothesis posits that an advancement of the Sumerian civilization was the result of human migrations from the mountainous area of northeast Mesopotamia to the southern marshes of Iraq, with ensuing assimilation of the previous populations. Details such as home architecture, particular arched reed buildings, food gathering, grazing water buffaloes, trapping birds, and spearing fish, rice cultivation, and means of transportation, slender bitumen-covered wooden boats called tar adad are documented as still being practiced by the indigenous population locally named Madan or Marsh Arabs. These, and just to pause right there, it's very interesting to see how basically the same culture and same way of life that the ancient Sumerians were living is still being practiced by the modern day population of these Marsh Arabs in southern Iraq. So this also could be evidence that these are the same people. But anyways, continuing, it says, this village lifestyle, which has remained unchanged for 7 millennia, suggests a possible link between the present-day Marsh inhabitants and ancient Sumerians. However, popular tradition considers the Marsh Arabs as a foreign group of unknown origin, which I would say that I would agree with the latter, that the Marsh Arabs are descendants of the ancient Sumerians based on these cultural connections. But anyways, it says Haplogroup J accounts for 55.1% of Iraqi sample, reaching 84.6% in the Marsh Arabs, one of the highest frequencies reported so far. So Marsh Arabs have an extremely high amount of haplogroup J. It's very interesting. Unlike the Iraqi samples, which displays a rough equal proportion of J1-M267 at 56.4% and J2-M16172 at 43.6%. Almost all Marsh Arab J chromosomes, 96%, belong to the J1-M267 clade, and in particular to sub haplogroup J1-page 08. And also, there's even haplogroup E found among the Marsh Arabs. I'll go ahead and read that, even though our focus is on J. But haplogroup E, which characterizes 6.3% of Marsh Arabs and 13.6% of Iraqis, is represented by E-M123 in both groups and E-M78 mainly in the Iraqis. So that's also fairly interesting. Two hypotheses have been proposed for the origin of Marsh Arabs. They could be Aboriginal inhabitants of Mesopotamia correlated to the old Sumerians, which I would agree. The analysis carried out on the mtDNA and Y chromosome of the Iraqi Marsh Arabs, a population living in the Tigris-Euphrates marshlands, have shown a prevalent autochthonous Middle Eastern component both in the male and female gene pools. So they are indigenous. A higher male than female homogeneity mainly determined by the co-occurrence of socio-cultural and genetic factors, whereas most frequent J1-page 808 branch reveals a local recent migration about 4,000 years ago. Although the Y chromosome age estimates deserve caution, particularly when samples are small and standard errors large, it is interesting to note that these estimates overlap the city-state period which characterized southern Mesopotamia and is attested to by numerous ancient Sumerian cities: Lagash, Uruk, Eridu, and Larsh. So basically, there does seem to be a genetic overlap in the time period when these city-states of Sumerians began with the Marsh Arabs and haplogroup J. In conclusion, our data shows that the modern Marsh Arab of Iraq harbor mtDNAs and Y chromosomes that are predominantly of Middle Eastern origin. Moreover, a Middle Eastern ancestral origin of the modern population of the marshes of southern Iraq implies that if the Marsh Arabs are descendants of the ancient Sumerians, also Sumerians are not of Indian or southern Asian ancestry. So Marsh Arabs are our best bets for the ancient Sumerians, I would say. So if Marsh Arabs truly do descend from the Sumerians, then this would prove that the Sumerians had haplogroup J. Furthermore, if Sumerians had haplogroup J, this could link them with the Nakh peoples. Linguistically speaking, there is a high chance that they are linked when it comes to the Sumerian and Caucasian languages. But with that being said, the story of the Nakh people coming from Mesopotamia to the Caucasus could be true, that we see in archaeology and even their oral history. So everything is lining up. But perhaps the most interesting thing about all of this is the highest concentration of haplogroup J being among them. I think that's extremely powerful. And remember, again, haplogroup J2A4B*M67 comprise 51 through 79% of the Y chromosomes in the English and three Chechenian populations, Northeast Caucasus Nakh linguistic group. Finally, haplogroup J1*M267 comprise 44 through 99% of the Avar, Dargans, the Kittaiks, the Kabachi, and Lusians, the southeastern Caucasus Dagestan linguistic group. And that was from parallel evolution of genes and languages in the Caucasus region. Remember, these Caucasian populations have the highest amounts of haplogroup J, whether it's J1, as you can see right here, J1, here are the populations, and here are the references. And here's J2, here are the populations, and here are the references. The English have 89% of J2 Y DNA, which is the highest known frequency in the world, and J2 is closely associated with the Fertile Crescent. Haplogroup J accounts for 55.1% of the Iraqi samples, reaching 84.6% in the Marsh Arabs, one of the highest frequencies reported so far. Unlike the Iraqi sample, which displays a roughly equal proportion of J1-M267 at 56.4% and J2-M172 at 43.6%, almost all Marsh Arab chromosomes is 96% belonging to the J1-M267 clade, and in particular to sub-haplogroup J1-page 08. And of course, that is from In Search of the Genetic Footprints of Sumerians, a survey of Y chromosome and mtDNA variation in the Marsh Arabs of Iraq. So it's interesting how some of the highest forms of haplogroup J are basically among non-Semitic speakers, both in ancient and modern times. The Nakh people having 51 through 79%, the Dagestan having 44 through 99%, basically 100, and the Marsh Arabs having around like 96%. So although the Marsh, now here's one caveat that I want to make that is actually pretty important to keep in mind. So although the Marsh Arabs today speak a Semitic language, they speak, Arabic, this just confirms the fact that populations with haplogroup J adopted Semitic. If the Marsh Arabs are indeed descendants of Sumerians who spoke a non-Semitic language, then how do Marsh Arabs speak a Semitic language today? At some point in time, their ancestors must have adopted their Semitic tongue from Semitic populations. I feel like it's highly probable that haplogroup J started off as a non-Semitic speakers, and particularly of the Proto-Caucasian speakers, and that ancient populations like the Sumerians would have been one of those non-Semitic groups with haplogroup J speaking a Northeast Caucasian language and adopted it from the Semites that were around them. And at that point, it would have been the Akkadians. So now let's look into the phenotype. The phenotype of the Sumerians is very interesting. They left artwork of themselves of how they looked. They left quite a bit of art of how they looked, from statues to murals and little figurines. But from what I could tell when looking at their statues, looking at their artwork, is that they would have had an Armenoid phenotype, and this is even confirmed when it comes to their human remains. That was Armenoid. So let's get into that. Armenoid, just to do a refresher: short-headed and high skull type with fleshy features, a flat occiput and hooked nose, often black-haired with light brown skin, common in mountainous regions of Asia Minor, especially Armenia and Anatolia, was found in ancient Sumerians. So here is a Sumerian statue right next to a Chechenian. I believe that's a Chechenian or an English. But you can see, to me, there is striking resemblance from obviously to skin tone, hair, beard, etc. Here are Sumerian murals. This is from the southern Iraq of the Standard of Ur. This is another stone carving of Sumerian soldiers. And right here is actually a Kurd, and right here is an Armenian, and this is also an Armenian woman. And just by looking at the features of these Sumerians and these Armenian and Kurdish people, is that phenotypically they look very similar, having, as the Armenoid phenotype is, more of a hooked nose type, as you can see with the Sumerians, or a triangular nose, which fits along with the Armenians. I would say that Sumerians would look a lot like the Armenoid peoples. Here's more figurines. They even classify it as the Armenoid. And here is a Kurdish man, a Kurd, two Kurdish men. And just judging by the way that the Sumerians chose to depict themselves, from the way that they shaped the nose to the curvature of the head, I would say that it does fit that of these Armenoid-like peoples that still reside in the Middle East today. Here is another Sumerian statue, as you can see right here, uniform. But obviously they over and over again purposely depicted themselves with this almost hooked or triangular nose, which fits exactly with that of this Armenian man. This is Armenian, where we get the term the Armenoid type. And their person to me seems to be a very interesting match between the two. And here is a Chechnyan or an Englishman, got offline, and his features does match that of a typical Sumerian statue. And this would make sense if Sumerians are indeed the ancestors of, or ethnic group related to, the Chechnyans and English. And here is a Kurdish man with his features being no different than this of this Sumerian tablet, having the triangular or hooked nose, and I would say it fits perfectly. So, to conclude, I would say that there is indeed a connection between Sumerians and peoples of the Caucasus, or the Armenoid peoples, and that they did indeed share the same language, which was non-Semitic, but in fact Caucasian, and that they shared a genetic link, being Haplogroup J, and they also shared a phenotype, which is, of course, Armenoid. But this is where we end the Nakh, Sumerians, and Haplogroup J. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe, click the bell, share the video, and leave a comment for any questions you might have. And follow my social media accounts to contact me and to get to know when new episodes come out. And with all of that out of the way, have a great day and shalom.